Welcome to the Beau Show. The #1 show on Netflix right now is not what you might expect. It's a dystopian South Korean episodic series called Squid Game.
And I'll admit I'd actually never heard of it until a random girl in the elevator told me about it. I was reluctant to even give it a chance. But once I saw the preview and realized it was a Korean format, it looked interesting enough for me to try out. After all, I didn't really know much about the Korean Oscar winner for Best Picture a few years ago, Parasite. But I decided I had to see what all the hoopla was all about. Spoiler alert though, I will be talking about a lot of things about this show, so if you haven't seen it and you don't want to know what happens in it, maybe check back on this particular episode after you've watched it. And the reason that I say that is because I have to talk in depth about the overall themes of this series and its deeper meaning, and whether this series has elements of real life in it. As a summary, Squid Game is a 9-episode series about South Korean people who find themselves in debt or destitute in major need of money. It was conceptualized and created by Dong-hyuk, who has been shopping this series around since 2009 and only got Netflix on board in 2019 when Netflix decided to create more foreign and international content. It attracted more than 142 million viewers in its first 4 weeks, making it Netflix's most watched series ever. Apparently, Hwang loosely based this series on his own economic struggles, as well as class disparity in South Korea. The protagonist, Gi-Hun, is a struggling chauffeur, but also a gambler. So anytime he finds any money at all, he gambles it. We all know people like this. He even has a daughter and should be thinking of her well-being and her future, but he squanders any money that comes his way. This is the profile of a chronic gambler. Other characters in this series also find themselves in debt, and every time a well-dressed man in a suit approaches these people in dire need of money and challenges them to a child's game where they can win money. When Gi-Hun accepts this challenge, he is eventually taken to an unknown location to play a larger set of 6 games, in which he finds himself among 456 other contestants, all in debt. Gi-Hun finds a childhood friend in this set of contestants as well, and they are all lured by the prize money, but they are in an unknown location with an undisclosed set of games monitored by masked officers who keep them sequestered. Little do they know, anyone that loses a game is immediately killed, much to the competitor's surprise. That's the Cliff's Notes version of the show, and it's filled with very, very explicit violence and gore, which many will find unsettling. But I found so many metaphors and applications to today's society and world that I felt an in-depth analysis would be fitting. The show's creator says that this series is a bit of a commentary on modern capitalist society, which I think should be examined. So now I will take a more detailed approach. Remember that art imitates life, and I think this series exposes a number of real-world scenarios. For instance, we know that there are many people that are in debt. Loan sharks are after people just like Gi-Hun, the protagonist. People who are in debt tend to create more debt for themselves because in many cases they have a gambling addiction. That's why the lead, Gi-Hun, sees a way to solve his problems by an even higher stakes gamble. Little does he know that the high stakes series of games comes with the penalty of death if you lose. But he's willing to risk it. The players sign consent forms when they are entered into the system, basically assuming all risks. This is a consent form where they agree not to interrupt the games, and also that if they refuse to play the game, they will be eliminated, meaning killed. This is eerily similar to the state of the Chinese Communist Party's level of allegiance. You cannot be rebellious. That is the essence of what the CCP does to its citizens. You have to obey their rules or you are, well, eliminated. Whatever choices you make must be subservient to the greater system. Even the way the workers in Squid Game are all relatively anonymous behind masks. They are worker bees who have an emotionless job. They have a strict chain of command. And then look at the beautiful atmosphere that the games behold, especially in the first game. Red light, green light. It looks like child's play because that's the game that they have arranged. You go when the big-headed figure says green light, and you stop when it says red light. But if you move after red light, guns come out of the biodome and shoot you dead. To me, this signifies the specter of communism. It gives you the appearance of beauty, the blue skies, the simple rules and promise. It's just a game, but you pay with your life if you don't obey the rules of the game. Therein lies the fraud of the CCP. Think about the pandemic and how China completely tried to cover its tracks with respect to the Wuhan lab, even though its lab and scientists are directly controlled by the CCP. They even accused the US military of originating the virus. It was all subterfuge. Throughout the Squid Games, the masked officials tell the players they are trying to maintain the equality or democracy of the games. And they hang people who interfere and put them on display. This seems to me to indicate once again the fraudulent notion that there is egalitarianism or democracy in the specter of totalitarian communism. The players do not get to set the rules of the game. They have no say. The only thing that they can vote on is if there is a majority who want to quit, they will overrule the minority and the games will end. But truly, elites run this game and do not flinch when a player is eliminated by immediate death. Here's the part that I think really hits home. When players are eliminated, they are put in these funny-looking coffins that are ribbon-clad, almost like a present. And in some cases, a doctor, who's actually a player in the game, extracts their organs to be later sold. This was a reality in China. What once started as organ harvesting for death row inmates has turned into full-on live organ harvesting, especially among practitioners of Falun Gong, a meditative practice deriving from Buddhism, as well as the Uyghur Muslims. This part of the show is not an illusion or a metaphor. It actually happens and continues to happen, and is intended to intimidate and strike fear in hearts. This is a brutal practice, and I was shocked to see it actually depicted in Squid Game. Another element that is so similar to the CCP is the way it brings out the worst in human beings and turns humans into animals through intense struggle. Remember that Mao's idea of communism rests on the principle of violence and struggle. In Squid Game, players are all in this big, same large sleeping space, and players know that each player that dies means less competition and more money in the pot. So the fewer players available means better chances to win. So you see dog-eat-dog mentality, and the game managers permit it. They also arrange a game in which you have to pick a partner. And most of the players tried to choose someone that, can help them win, with the idea of a partnership in mind. Little do they know that they are playing a game of marbles. And that means that the player that you picked will either die or you will die. What a morbid and sick game. You think you're picking someone to help you win, and now you have to play that person. It's you or him. Both of you cannot move on. That is the kind of sick masochism that Mao created. Violence was condoned as long as the party was upheld. Mao advocated a cultural revolution every 7 or 8 years. The way Squid Game moves forward is by people grouping themselves into classes and creating class warfare and infighting. They literally play the kids' game of tug of war in this show, and the losers fall to their immediate deaths. In another game, they have to run across a glass bridge individually, where one panel is tempered and can support their weight, and another panel which cannot, and they'll fall to their death. This not only creates an individual quandary, but also the idea that if you can push someone onto a panel from behind to their death, you can figure out which panels can support weight and which cannot. Do you see how this brings out man's most guttural and inhumane nature? Everything about these games destroys trust. It can also eliminate those that might be disobedient to the system. You might pick your best friend to be on your tug of war team to beat another group of people, but then if you pick a friend to play marbles, you realize that one of you has to be eliminated. So what do? You play to win, or sacrifice yourself for your friend or your family? This is how communism destroys any sense of individuality, morality, and responsibility. There is no dignity in these games. You can't feel good about advancing even though they dangle the treasure chest in front of you. When the game comes down to the final three, they supply each of them with a sharp steak knife. Why would they do this? Because they know they have brought out man's most inhuman nature, that someone will kill to gain an advantage. It also instills greed. Of the original 456 players, only one can win. And while they all have the choice to walk away if a majority decides to, it becomes clear that most want to stay in the game because the pot keeps getting bigger and bigger with each eliminated player. They figure, well, I've gone this far, there's no turning back, even if it means killing my childhood best friend. Fear is also the main method used by the managers of Squid Game. The contestants constantly live in a state of fear, which is exactly what Mao set up in the CCP. Your property and the money could be seized at any time. Your family could be taken from you. You could be arrested. You were playing an unknown game each time, and you trembled in fear. That's been very real. Communism destroys morality and the sense of right and wrong. At one point, Gi-Hun aims to kill his childhood friend while he's sleeping. His female counterpart tells him not to do that because he's not a murderer. And Gi-Hun has this moment of conscience. As he tries to get medical help for his friend who's injured, his childhood friend goes over and kills her. This just shows you the depravity of man and what totalitarian regimes like this do. The killing becomes clinical and commonplace. Meanwhile, there are a group of elites getting pleasure from all of this. They sit behind glass and bet on individual players the way people bet on horses. And they do it for fun, for their own entertainment. They look at human beings the way that we would look at a pack of rabid dogs fighting for a scrap of meat. Another interesting parallel was the way that the game managers fed the players. All they provided was one egg and a soda. It's like a forced food shortage, the way the CCP did. When players are in the game, they are totally removed from information from the outside world. They have no contact or source of information, much the way the CCP prevents news from the outside and only permits party propaganda. The Tiananmen Square massacre would be a great parallel to this. The way this game works is no game at all. It is a system based upon violence and fear, so that the individual loses all sense of ethics and morality. Players try to form alliances to protect themselves, but then they can't sleep at night because someone in their own alliance might kill them in the dead of night. The only option is survival. That may mean the elimination of one's friends and family. Just like the anonymous pink-clothed workers that all have a basic geometric shape on their masks, eventually the players will lose their humanity and morality to create more workers of this kind and perpetuate the system. In fact, it is revealed that the frontman of the games was a former contestant and winner. He became part of the system. You would think that anyone who survived that and who had seen all the blood and the violence and the carnage would want no part of it. But he is now part of the very system and promoted for his victory. We also see many of the players turn on each other and rat them out, the way the CCP established a system of turning defectors in. Even if those were friends and family, there's no good or bad or right or wrong. The final game, which is the actual Squid Game, comes down to Gi-Hun and his childhood friend. Remember, only one can win. And Gi-Hun asks his friend to just give up and vote to walk away from the games. They would lose the money, but they'd get to keep their lives. Unfortunately, his friend, who throughout most of his life was a benevolent guy, has become inhuman throughout the games and takes his own life. The game and the system became so unbearable that he was willing to take his life. All of this violence and infighting becomes normalized and rationalized. Players are told, congratulations, after each game that they win. But they lose all joy. There's no sense of fulfillment. They become zombies. All sense of human nature has been removed, and only the spirit of the games remain, or to make a real-life parallel, the party spirit. The creator of the series says that the show is about losers, and I can see that. The winner in the end is no winner at all. He's still a loser. He's lost his spirit. He's lost his humanity. The game or system has been created by rich elites who have all the freedom, while the players become like horses that they bet on. The elites in Squid Game come from all areas of the world, which to me was symbolic of the globalists. Everything is for their pleasure. When I saw the basic geometric shapes used throughout, the triangle, the square, and the circle, and even the very lo-fi pixelated scoreboard, it reminded me of the old Sony PlayStation game controllers. And it also reminded me of how uniform systems can become with no deviation. You're a square, a circle, or a triangle. Each worker is in a different class. Also, the very colorful staircase the players walk through is very similar to the Dutch artist M.C. Escher's relativity print, which depicts the illusion of staircases that connect at impossible angles. It's as though the world is upside down, which it is in communism. It's antithetical to all norms and traditions. When Gi-Hun re-enters the real world with all of the money, he seems sunken, defeated, downtrodden, basically the same loser he was before, but emotionless and sullen. He's supposed to be getting on a plane to go see his daughter, but before doing so, he sees a man playing the same game he originally was challenged to play before he went to the full Squid Games. Rather than getting on the plane, he decides he's got to go back. And this is a cliffhanger. Perhaps he's going back to get rid of the sordid, twisted game that he wished he never played. We just don't know. But there are so many parallels to our real world. And even though the show's creator claims that it's about modern capitalism and greed, there are far too many parallels to the CCP. In fact, true to the propaganda that I have described, a North Korean propaganda website lauded Squid Game for showing how the South is where, quote, corruption and immoral scoundrels are commonplace, end quote. It added that the drama showed the sad reality of the beastly South Korean society. Oh, how ironic. North Korea, under totalitarian rule, thinks their system of fear and lack of freedom is superior to capitalism and liberty. Sure, greed can lead people to do terrible things. I see Squid Game as more of a commentary on totalitarianism and communism than anything else. The only thing egalitarian in Squid Game is the way each contestant is killed after elimination. But there's one interesting twist. The game's mastermind says that each contestant voluntarily signed up to play, and that is true. While we can blame the elites for creating the game, isn't it the player's choice to play it? Once they're committed, they can't back out. I think about communism and the sworn allegiance to the party. It is very difficult to leave. But even in capitalist societies, are we just being pawns when we volunteer and sign our consent? I know that this series was made before the pandemic, but I thought about all the masks the workers wore and the strict rules and the lockdowns. And it's like, did we create this monster? They are only on the island by their own accord. If the majority rules to leave, they leave, game over. And I think about that even here in the United States and the type of totalitarianism we allow here. The pandemic brought out many insecurities and base instincts, and it exposed a lot of mental health weaknesses. It has pitted families and friends against each other in a very tribal way. That's what totalitarianism does, especially with the very powerful element of fear. And we all know what fear felt like last year. Communism has destroyed minds and lives and comes from an insidious evil specter based on violence, evil, and corruption. We have some of those same elements infecting parts of America. Greed is never a good thing. I see many of the group identity struggles we have right now in the United States as a form of class warfare. Some of the groups are actually rooted in Marxism, if you can believe that. You have cultural Marxists walking among us. Squid Game, as dystopian as it seems, is not as far from reality as you might think. And the organ harvesting is a very real thing. People's minds can be warped over time, where eventually there is no morality or ethics or conscience. We can't allow that to happen. I don't recommend Squid Game to everyone because of its violence, but to those who can process it with an open mind about the world and genocide and how art can imitate life, it might be worth your while. I'm Beau, and that's the show.